And of course, right as we go live, I get a phone call. They can leave a message.
Yeah, I just had my phone on in case you and I had some kind of communications issue.
Yeah. Well, once the actual program starts, I'm going to go through and mute everybody except him. So if you want to speak, you'll have to unmute yourself. But I'm just going to mute everybody just to keep it simple. In fact, I'm going to mute myself right now and listen to the stream and make sure it's picking up sound.
Okay.
All right, we have sound and about a 30 to 45-second delay. So just be aware of that when we go to Q&A, that there is a delay there.
Okay.
And that's pretty standard. There's really not much we can do about it.
Right, right. I wish I could have brought Joe down that had some kind of event.
Yeah, it'll pick back up one day.
I think it will. I mean, how much pressure have you had to face with this event on Thursday night?
These are all the directional signs.
Well,
that's my big contribution.
I hope the attendance is okay.
It should be good. We're planning for a lot.
Well, some of the community people, should be a fairly decent community turnout.
Mm-hmm. I've heard a lot of interest.
So the audio is good.
Yeah, audio is great. We've got a little bit of a delay, which is very interesting, but I've got that muted. But I can see us moving out of the corner of my eye on the stream over here. And it's just enough of a delay that I can look at myself, which is very weird.
I suspect right at 3:30 we'll have a kind of a lot of people joining.
A deluge. It's possible. I'll be interested to see who the first person in is. I'm always amused whenever we send out an email that has like the Zoom link in it. There's inevitably a person who will immediately click the link, even if it's for something that is not happening right then. And that's always fun.
Yeah, I mean, having taught a year and a half on Zoom, I think I pretty much saw everything. I saw a fight behind me one time in class. I was teaching class in the dorm room, guys pushing each other. Some other things I won't mention, but just also people asleep. That was, and a lot of ceiling fans, which is very common. They turn the cell phone towards the ceiling fans.
Yeah, I get a lot of like the upwards camera.
Right.
So that's always fun. My dad is notorious for it when he calls on FaceTime. It's always like right here. Like, how is that even comfortable?
Yeah, it's frustrating when people. Well, my grandson has he's very technologically adept. He's 9, but he's putting images and horns on people and you can't really talk to him because you can't see him because he's got a moose head, digital electronic moose head
Mm-hmm.
graphic on his head. Or he's changing, and so
Yeah. Used to be so much more difficult to do all that stuff, and now it's just a click away.
right.
There must be someone outside your office.
Yeah, it's Fogel and Terry. They both are excited, joking around.
Terry.
Harry Vogel
Ah, okay.
and Terry Brown. Yeah.
I thought Terry was out today.
Well, I just heard her laugh, so I'm pretty sure that's her.
Okay.
I've got 320 cats, so we got to.
Yeah, we should start seeing people show up in just a minute.
Just got a note from Dr. Chiazzo. He's chiming in. That's good.
No, we shouldn't have to let anybody into the meeting. That should be automatic.
That's good too. Because that's a problem with Teams. Teams are. So I'm got about, it looks like about 8 minutes.
Mhm. I hope he's coming back.
He will. Tom's suggesting we send the link out again, but I think it came out later this morning, didn't it?
Mm-hmm. It was 8:50.
Yeah, I thought it was, I was here. Maybe Tom.
Cheeky baby, you hear me?
Hey, Tom. Gotcha.
I'm on the road.
You sound good. Good sound quality.
Good. I'm on the road doing that adult learner stuff, but I'm on you, baby.
Thank you. We need Kat and I here need all the help we can get. And you know Joe. Tom knows Joe.
Seems like a
Daniel there?
dangerous. Not yet.
Hey, Kat.
Hi, Dr. Chiazzo.
How are you? Sorry.
Doing great.
How's my stuff coming?
It's coming along. It's taken a little time. I keep getting pulled off into other projects, but I should have it done for you this week.
No worries. I was more worried about the initial stuff we ordered, the marketing stuff from Mallard. I know they take a long time.
Yeah, I've already approved the proof, so that should be coming back in the next few days.
Doing my best. Thank you for all you do.
No problem. Just doing what I can.
How many people are signed on so far?
Us.
Oh, that's it?
Yeah. Nah,
Oh, boy.
I expect a few more to come in the next few minutes.
I thought it'd be hundreds of people. Oh, that's right. It's the Constitution. Nobody cares.
And I texted Harley to see if she could resend the email real quick, but I don't know if she'll be able to do so.
Is she on campus? She was.
Lee, you talked to Mullins. Is he coming on board?
I'm sorry.
Have you talked to Robert or Daniel?
Daniel's in. I haven't heard from Robert. I mean,
Who? Hey, Daniel. He's probably mute.
here's Joe coming back.
Okay.
Hey, gang.
Joe, you're back. Yay.
Hello, hello.
All right. So will I see any of the participants here, or are they just going to be?
You should be able to see them
You'll
on
be able
Zoom,
to see them, yes.
but right now it's just the four of us, and
So
Tom
slow.
is traveling, so he does not have his camera on.
Hey, Paisan, how you doing, buddy?
Which Tom is this, man? Let me see.
Tom from the Georgia Political Science Meeting.
Hey, Tom, what's up?
What's up, my brother? You doing all right?
Doing all right. I'm in, I'm up here in the People's Republic of New York.
Well,
Governor Hochul's running.
better
She's-
you than me.
She's a Catholic University alum.
There you go.
So Joe, she's got that in common with us. You should,
Caitlin, Cat does?
yeah,
Yep.
the mayor, the governor, excuse me.
Oh, Hochul, I didn't know that.
Yeah, she went to law school at Catholic.
She's probably about our age, right?
I think she is, exactly.
She's in her 50s, yeah.
Yes, Dan Mansell, how you doing?
Good, sir. How are you doing?
Good.
Good
Hey,
to see
Dan.
you.
Joe, you remember Daniel from Georgia Political Science?
Wow. We had a
It's
great
been a
time.
few years, yeah.
That was a great time. That was at Savannah, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah,
Was.
it was a great time. Well, I had a friend who did really well. He bought a place in Beaufort,
Oh, wow.
Carolina, a mansion in which they used as a hospital, and the 54th Massachusetts stayed there, and they have graffiti on the walls from them. Unbelievable.
Beaufort is a really nice area, really nice.
The lowlands, Lee.
Yeah. We call it the Low Country.
Low country.
I'm sorry, the low country. You're from the high country, right?
Yeah, I'm from the high country, but I'm moving further and further south. I'm retreating just like Jefferson Davis, getting further and further south. I'm going to run out of space pretty soon.
All right.
I have to go to Cuba.
I'm going to get back to my roots from Louisiana.
Well, it is nice living on the coast. I've been a blessed person.
Pretty, huh?
I'm at my home as a pirate, most naturally there, in fact, a couple of weeks we have a pirate festival on Tybee Island.
Oh, sorry.
We have Dr. Chevalier, our Associate Vice President for Academic Affairs. Nice to have him.
Boy, thank you.
Hey, David.
Hello, how are you?
Hey, David. Thanks for joining us.
Of course.
You guys are champs. Thought that we were finished with all the Zoom stuff after COVID. Now it becomes a way of life.
Mhm.
It does make some things easier.
Sure, yeah. Now, are students attending this?
Yes.
Yes, the invitation was sent out campus-wide, so if you want to maybe give another few minutes and
Yeah,
give them
we,
time to join in,
mm.
and if you'll just let me know when you're ready to go, I'll go through and mute everybody and put you on full speaker view, and we'll
So
go.
Candace, excuse me. Yeah, what I'll do is I'll introduce Joe, turn things over to Joe.
Okay,
And Joe, you just let us know when you're ready, and we'll be able to tell, of course, when you're ready for questions.
Okay.
and if any questions come through on the YouTube stream, I'll make sure to put them over in the chat on Zoom.
So will I see the students if they come, or?
If they've got cameras on, they should show up.
And very often they don't have cameras, so just, that's no statement, Joe, about your presentation or
Uh-huh.
anything else. It's just there, it gives them, they're doing multiple things at once, they're. So maybe in about 3 minutes, 3:35, we'll start.
Why is my dog barking? Tashi, no, there's no treat now.
Oh, but you said the word, that was the mistake.
Oh, God, you're right. I'm sorry. Helena?
Let's see your dog, Joe.
Yeah, now you have to pay the dog tax.
Let's see it.
Aw.
My puppy. Helena? Here, Tashi, no. Good puppy. I was thinking of wearing a tie, but I decided not to.
Joe's really a very sophisticated dresser. And I'm true, as a true,
I never.
a nice dresser. A man with sense of style, unlike some of us. I won't mention any names, it's bad my own.
Oh, God. Holy.
So Kat, I think we could begin in about a minute, if that's okay with you.
And I'm going to go ahead and turn my camera off. And that way we'll just have Dr. Fornieri as our upfront one.
And you can mute me after I introduce Joe,
Alrighty.
or I can mute myself, whichever you're. Okay, so we'll start in about 1 minute. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Dr. Lee Cheek, and on behalf of East Georgia State College and the Political Science Program at East Georgia State College, I'd like to welcome you to our 2022 Constitution Day celebration. And I think this will be a great and unique event. On behalf of Dr. Tom Chiazzo, Professor Daniel Mansell, and Professor Robert Mullins, allow me to welcome everybody. And this is going to be, I think, a very special event. One of the reasons it's so special is we have really a great speaker this afternoon. I'm very honored that the speaker is not only a very distinguished political scientist, but he's also a lifelong pal, close associate, and professional colleague of mine. And so allow me to introduce our special guest and speaker who has visited our region before and spoken to our region and even directed academic gatherings down the road in Savannah. Dr. Joseph Fornieri is professor of political science at Rochester Institute of Technology and the director of the Center for Statesmanship, Law, and Liberty, a nonpartisan organization that seeks to enhance the study of political greatness and responsible citizenship. Dr. Fornieri, or as I call him, Joe, is a distinguished scholar as well. He is a leading expert on the political thought of America's 16th president, Abraham Lincoln. And Joe's books have broken new ground, offered insights that were not available before, but he's also edited a number of other important books, including a book on Assessing Lincoln, a text for undergraduates on political thought. And he has just published from the University of Notre Dame Press a seminal work called American Statesmanship that's available right now in the East Georgia State College Library, which is a very important book, probably the most important compendium on American statecraft available today. And it is a great volume, 10 years of the preparation of arduous labor, just a great, and it has many distinguished contributors as well, and a few questionable ones as well. But I'm one of the questionable ones. But seriously, Joe is sharing with us this afternoon about the First Amendment, and it's important to our constitutional heritage. And Joe has just edited a book on the First Amendment and free speech that comes out of his long and very successful teaching career. And Joe is going to share with us some insights and also open the floor to questions. So this book is available for free download. I've already provided it to our college community. I also, as you mentioned, Joe is a very talented teacher, winning the Provost Award at Rochester Institute of Technology, and just a highly successful, gifted speaker. We hope to bring Joe down in person before long to speak on our college campus, but we'll have to do with Joe in the electronic version today. We're honored to have you, Dr. Fornieri, and I'm going to turn things over to you. And let me just give you an East Georgia State College welcome and how honored we are to have you with us.
Thank you so much, Lee, for that gracious, introduction. And we go back a long time, and I'm always, touched by your Southern hospitality. It's I'm a bit of a Southerner. My family comes from its origins from Southern Italy. So the hospitality means a lot. My grandfather was from Louisiana. So it's a real honor to be here, and I want to make this talk accessible and useful on what I consider, one of the most important topics we can be discussing in the academy, and something that I honestly think is under increasing threat, namely our right to free speech found in the First Amendment. Today we're celebrating Constitution Day, and of course, as our students know, and we may all know, it's worth repeating though, that the Bill of Rights came after the Constitution, right? It went into effect in 1791, and the Bill of Rights included those first 10 amendments, kind of cornerstones of our rights and liberties that restricted the power of the federal government. And of course, the First Amendment includes a litany of these fundamental rights, and I'll read it to you here. Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech or of the press or of the right of the people peaceably assemble. Well, this language, the language of the First Amendment here, I omitted the religion clauses because I want to focus on, I'm focusing here on speech. While the language looks straightforward, the literal text tends to conceal as much as it reveals, right? Although Congress is only mentioned, we know that today the First Amendment applies to any government agency. Okay, well, it may be the president, it may be a bureaucracy, and furthermore, because the First Amendment is incorporated, it means it's applied to the states through the Liberty Clause of the First Amendment of the 14th Amendment. It applies to the actions of state governments. We may recall that initially the Bill of Rights did not apply to the actions of the state governments. It only it only applied to the actions of the federal government. This changed with the doctrine of incorporation. And to the surprise of some, the First Amendment does not apply to private institutions. East Georgia is a private institution. It's a public institution. So you are, the First Amendment does apply to you. It does not apply technically to the Rochester Institute of Technology where I work, unless we adopt some statement, some official mission statement, and then we can be legally bound to upholding it, but not unless we do that. So, and although speech is literally mentioned in the Constitution, the speech and press, we know that the Supreme Court has extended the First Amendment to include things like symbolic expression, flag burning, most notably, sexual expression like pornography is protected, commercial expression like advertising, and even in the famous recent case about 20 years ago, video games. Okay, and finally, although the First Amendment declares no law, the right to free speech is not absolute. And that's something, it's a major theme I want to discuss today. Where do we draw the line between protected speech and punishable speech, right? When does speech cross a line? On what grounds should we restrict speech, right? Should we allow the publication of atomic secrets? What about speech that wounds and hurts and harasses or intimidates? Should we tolerate that type of speech? What about speech that incites imminent lawless action? So part of the story of the First Amendment is the effort of the Supreme Court, especially the past 100 years. This is known as the free speech century from 1919 2019, beginning with the landmark case of Schenck versus the United States and the clear and present danger test, to draw that line, to come up with some standard, some criteria, some rule to distinguish between protected and punishable speech. And we, of course, we debate that every day and have to live within that gray area often. It's not the uncontroversial speech that really gives us difficulties. It's offensive, it's controversial speech. It's those tough cases where we have to really make fine distinctions. Justice Holmes famously said, "The right to free speech does not give us the right to falsely shout fire in a crowded theater." This was in the Schenck case I mentioned. And as I mentioned, one of the enduring issues faced has been where to draw this line. What I'd like to do this evening is to provide a brief overview of some key First Amendment principles. Okay, consider this your basic toolkit for understanding the court's often complicated interpretation of the First Amendment. So we can understand the meaning of free speech today and some of those parameters if we understand some of the core principles that I'm going to talk about this afternoon. Through much struggle and strife over the past century, the First Amendment has attained a preferred place in our constitutional scheme. And that's the first principle I'm going to talk about. The First Amendment enjoys a preferred position. Justice Cardosa aptly described it as the matrix, the indispensable condition of nearly every other freedom. Okay, so every other freedom depends upon free speech. And of course, we should understand why, rather than take free speech for granted. What function, what service does it perform to democracy? It is the very lifeblood of democracy. Okay, for example, free speech is essential to democracy for many reasons. The expressive acts of speaking, writing, associating, assembling, and dissenting are crucial to the fundamental democratic principle of consent of the governed, right? I mean, consent is impossible without speech, without voicing approval on the one hand, or dissenting disapproval. And yesterday's or today's dissenter may be tomorrow's majority. So second, freedom of speech and press, of course, help to ensure accountability of public officials, provided that the press is serving its function as intended and is unbiased. It exposes the darkness of corruption to daylight. Third, another justification for free speech and for its preferred place in our democracy is that it serves as a safety valve. This is a very interesting argument. It provides an outlet for dissenting and radical voices to blow off steam. Whereas if we didn't have this opportunity, they might be driven underground, where their allure will attract a certain following in intrigue, and they may consider themselves, they may be viewed as martyrs more broadly by the public. And instead of discrediting their views will gain more credibility through persecution, which is interesting. So allow them to blow off steam and expose the thought to daylight. In Dennis versus the United States, William O. Douglas expressed this safety valve position in these terms, that the airing of ideas releases pressures which otherwise might become destructive. Okay, the court would, the civil libertarians would often point to the example of the Tsar and how the efforts to restrict radical views and censorship in imperial Russia really backfired. It made martyrs of the radicals who were persecuted, and it seemed to be a futile endeavor. So the best antidote to speech, to radical speech, is counter speech. Okay. Finally, one can, look, borrowing, the views of John Stuart Mill, free speech advances progress through a competition of ideas that spurs innovation and creativity. We're familiar with one of the dominant free speech metaphors, the marketplace of ideas, another core free speech principle today, that government should pursue a laissez-faire, hands-off approach to ideas. It should not prefer one over another, but allow these ideas, notions, opinions, speeches compete in the marketplace. Okay, with the trust that the best ideas will slowly win out, while archaic notions like the earth is flat, for example, will slowly fade out. Okay, I mentioned the preferred position of free speech today as a core principle. What does that mean more specifically? Students should always bear in mind that our legal process is adversarial, right? It involves competing claims and interests. And the court adjudicates between these colliding interests or claims. So in First Amendment law, you have the interest of a government authority, state, national, or local, against the free speech interest. Okay, so you have the right of the state of Texas in Texas versus Johnson or the interest of the state of Texas to preserve the flag as a symbol of patriotism and national unity, against Gregory Johnson's expressive interest in displaying his contempt for his own government in expressing this dissenting viewpoint. Okay, so it's always a collision, a clash between these two interests. Consider the image of Lady Justice, right? The goddess, in ubiquitous image of Lady Justice, and she's holding the scales, right? That's the way to look at the court's jurisprudence in the adversarial process. On the one scale is the government interest, okay? And it may be morality, it may be national security, it may be public health. Think about, we certainly have had restrictions on speech and assembly given concerns about public health during COVID. And on the other scale is the free speech interest. So, but Themis, this goddess, is blindfolded. She's clasping a sword in one hand and upholding the scale in the other. The blindfold represents impartiality, the scale, equity, the sword, the force of law. But given the privileged status of speech, if we look at this, look at her, these two claims, that more weight is going to be given to the free speech claim in this collision. Right from the beginning of the contest, the government faces an uphill burden, okay, if it is to prevail over free speech. Laws are subjected to, in a very important legal term, laws are subjected to what's called strict scrutiny. Any law that restricts speech, okay, faces an increased burden of unconstitutionality given the privileged or preferred place of speech in our constitutional scheme, okay, is exemplified through the tilted scale analogy, okay? Let me speak to a little more about strict scrutiny. This test of heightened judicial review includes two hurdles or prongs. One, the government must first demonstrate a compelling purpose or end that the law seeks to advance. For example, national security or civil order or morality, okay? This hurdle is not too difficult for the government to traverse, okay? It can be satisfied by appealing to an implied or expressed constitutional power under national state law. The second prong, however, refers to the means used by the government to further this compelling interest, okay? In order to clear this higher hurdle, laws must be, under this strict scrutiny test, narrowly tailored to achieve the government's purpose in the least restrictive means, okay? So consider the example of a bulky winter jacket. You poor guys, this analogy is going to be lost on my friends from the South, but if you live in upstate New York, you deal with bulky winter jackets all the time. Its compelling purpose or end is to protect you from cold weather. That's a legitimate end. But its means to do so, let's say if it's excessively large, it's heavy, may restrict your ability to move freely. Much like being smothered in a large jacket, personal liberty is suffocated by poorly written laws that restrict speech, okay? These laws are known as unduly vague laws and overly broad laws that do not make a careful enough distinction between protected and unprotected speech. Okay, unduly vague laws are laws in which a reasonable person has to guess at their meaning. For example, a law that will restrict a bad tendency, speech that has a bad tendency, is unduly vague. What does a bad tendency mean? A reasonable person has to guess. And of course, this leads to what's known as the chilling effect, that overly broad and unduly vague laws and failing to make important distinctions about what is protected and unprotected, or to define terms clearly, lead to the threat of punishment and therefore self-censorship amongst citizens. It leaves you guessing, it leaves you in fear that you may be punished. Okay, and if speech is to perform its function in society, it needs to be exercised vigorously, not timidly, with the fear that you will be punished by the authorities, whether it's a state authority, a national authority, or a institutional authority like human resources. Okay, so by contrast, a narrowly tailored jacket protects you from the elements. It accomplishes this purpose or ends through means that allow you to breathe freely. Okay, so to repeat, any speech claim, any expressive claim is privileged in the court's eyes, given the role that free speech plays that I just mentioned in democracy: accountability, consent, the safety valve, progress. Laws that restrict speech, okay, in order to uphold a restriction, are subjected to what's known as strict scrutiny, a heightened level of judicial review. It's as if these laws are suspect from the beginning. The burden is placed on the government authority, and it must meet, again, the test of this strict scrutiny test involves, to use the legal terminology, a compelling interest in narrow tailoring to prevent the problem of infirm laws that are overly broad or unduly vague. Okay, they're imprecise. These unduly vague and overly broad laws. There's always going to be an inherent gray area. That's why I say overly broad and unduly vague. This is the law is not the application of First Amendment law is not like algorithms, right? There's always going to be judgment involved. A core First Amendment principle is that authorities may not bar expression simply because they find it. Here are some overly vague and unduly vague and overly broad terms that they find speech offensive, disturbing, or disagreeable, or even threatening. Okay. Under shifting standards that are arbitrary and capricious, unpopular views can be easily suppressed under a pretext of generalized claims of public order or public decency. Okay, and the history of the First Amendment shows that. Some of the most egregious assaults on the First Amendment come when when there is widespread fear. Right, widespread fear, and the Constitution itself and the First Amendment becomes a casualty in these moments. The threat of punishment creates, as I said, the chilling effect that induces self-censorship. Fearing repercussions for speaking out, people choose to remain silent. Indeed, recent polls disclose that 62% of all Americans fear that expressing their political views will harm their professional life. Remarkable. Should this be true, the chilling effect has frozen into a winter of discontent in the once famed land of liberty. Okay. So to prevent this chilling effect, the Supreme Court requires what's called, given its provision of speech, ample breathing room. Ample breathing room. Put another way, the court errs in protecting too much expression rather than too little. Okay. Consequently, the First Amendment tolerates offensive, fear, disturbing, and even some hateful speech. If citizens are to debate controversial issues forthrightly rather than holding their peace and festering silence, they have to do so with the confidence that their expression will not be investigated or punished by authorities, whether it be the FBI, HR, or a campus bureaucracy. Okay. Madison recognized this. Remember, he said very famously in 1800, some degree of abuse is inseparable from the proper use of everything. And in no instance is this more true than that of the press. It has accordingly been decided that it is better to leave a few of its noxious branches to their luxuriant growth than by pruning them away to injure the vigor of those yielding the proper fruits. Okay, and this, of course, was this quotation was included in the famous libel case of Times versus Sullivan in 1964. Okay, so I want to discuss now, in addition to preferred freedom, I want to discuss another core First Amendment principle, and that is viewpoint neutrality. So in this short time, you've heard preferred freedom, strict scrutiny, narrow tailoring, undue vagueness, overly broad, chilling effect. What is viewpoint or content neutrality? This is part of our First Amendment toolkit. I borrow the great definition by Nadine Strawson, who I would recommend you to read her book, Hate, Why We Should Resist It with More Speech rather than censorship. She says the principle of viewpoint neutrality or content neutrality, there is a technical difference, but I include them for the sake of simplification in this short speech together. It bars government from regulating speech solely because of its message, its idea, or its viewpoint, is disfavored or feared to be dangerous by government officials or community members. And to be sure, that's why it explains why the First Amendment, although it's upset some, provides shelter to both social justice warriors and racists alike. Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes went so far as to say, if there is any principle of the Constitution that more imperatively calls for attachment than any other, it is the principle of free thought. Not free thought for those who agree with us, but freedom for the thought that we hate. Thinking about that, ponder that. Do we teach our students that? We don't have to teach our students that we like hate. Hate is bad, but do we teach them that if we're really committed to the First Amendment, that means we have to allow some freedom of thought for what we hate. But on second thought, which is, good point, why shouldn't certain messages be banned from public discourse, right? Why should we tolerate intolerant speech in its content, in its viewpoint, speech that advocates racial supremacy, speech that degrades people, speech that would subordinate equals to an inferior status? Nazi propagandist Joseph Goebbels infamously maintained that if you repeated a lie enough, it will eventually be accepted as true. Perhaps certain kinds of speech should be suppressed to prevent falsehood and lies from winning out in the marketplace of ideas, lest it descend into a bull ring. But history also reveals that people indeed are notoriously swayed by base emotion and stirred by demagogic appeals. While there are certainly risks from tolerating offensive and hateful speech, the current view of the Supreme Court, and it is remarkable that notwithstanding deep partisan divisions, the court has been united in its First Amendment jurisprudence, liberals and conservatives, is that the dangers of such censorship outweigh the risks associated with constitutionally protected hate speech. It's worth it to mention very briefly here the question of hate speech and what its current status is. Is hate speech protected under the First Amendment? The answer is Yes and no. No, there is no specific content-based or viewpoint-based category of hate speech simply because of what it says, the content or the message can be censored. Okay. However, hate speech, if it crosses a line into harassment or direct incitement under the circumstances, okay, so it's the message coupled with that next moment of threat or harassment may be restricted. Okay, so the court maintains its principle of preferred speech as well as content neutrality, while allowing the restriction of hate speech under certain narrowly tailored circumstances. In one of the key cases dealing with this is called Virginia versus Black in 2003. Okay, in an often repeated passage by the court, Justice Jackson in the Barnett case defended the principle of viewpoint neutrality in these weighty terms. If there is any fixed star in our constitutional constellation, so great that justices are always great. Best justices are always great at using analogies, right? Fixed star in our constitutional constellation, okay? It is that no official, high or petty, can prescribe what shall be orthodox in politics, nationalism, religion, or other matters of opinion, or force, interesting, citizens to confess by word or act their faith therein. Raises questions about having to attend unconscious bias seminars and what people may be forced to confess or say. In sum, the First Amendment forbids the coercion of any public orthodoxy, however well-intentioned. That's why it decided in 1989 in Texas versus Johnson that state laws punishing flag desecration were unconstitutional because they favored a viewpoint of patriotism. Okay, the rejection of viewpoint neutrality necessarily restricts the opposite practice of viewpoint discrimination. Okay, that if you have a marketplace of ideas, you cannot have one side, let's say, fighting freestyle, while the other side could fight no holds barred. I'm sorry, one side using Marquis of Queensberry rules while the other side fights no hold bars. In other words, you can't restrict some forms of speech. Let's say, to consider a recent example, some proclaim that Black lives matters. Others believe that all lives matters. Still others declare that blue lives matters. Government cannot favor one of these messages in the marketplace of ideals. To do so would constitute a blatant double standard of viewpoint discrimination and the principle of free speech for me, not for thee. Okay. A final principle, final First Amendment principle in our toolkit is what we're going to refer to as the emergency principle. Okay, and this means that we look at standards distinguishing between protected versus punishable speech. Speech can only be restricted in the context, in the circumstance of an emergency, when there is a threat, a tangible threat of imminent lawless action. This is a standard the court drew up in Brandenburg versus Ohio, 1969, when it's as if there has to be a close causal connection and nexus between speech and action under the emergency principle. It's as if the court will wait to the very minute until the match is struck. Okay, then the speech can be restricted if it's moving towards igniting the explosive. So when does speech cross the line? Okay, only in context when it poses, Nadine Strawson mentions, an emergency, when it, here's the key, when it directly, demonstrably, and imminently causes certain specific, objectively ascertainable serious harms that cannot be averted by non-censorial measures. Okay, counter speech or law enforcement. Okay, so in other words, the First Amendment does not protect your feelings. Okay, the unanimously decided precedent of Brandenburg versus Ohio illustrates the emergency principle. Brandenburg was caught on tape holding a shotgun, using the N-word and proclaiming, "We're not a revenging organization, but if our president, our Congress, or our Supreme Court continues to suppress the white Caucasian race, it's possible that there might have to be some revengeance taken." Okay. Brandenburg's remarks were delivered in the context of a membership rally among fellow Klansmen in Ohio in opposition to the Civil Rights Act of 1964. The court argued that this offensive speech was protected because he spoke in general terms rather than targeting a specific individual or proposing a concrete action step to carry out his unlawful purpose. Finally, he used conditional language. Some revengeance might have to be taken. So in regard to this, the court developed what was called the emergency test, or the imminent lawless action test. Speech cannot be restricted unless it poses an imminent lawless action in the likelihood to incite directly such action. Okay. So just to repeat, the three core principles that we talked about in interpreting the First Amendment, its preferred place in our constitutional scheme, and that given the preferred place, all laws that restrict speech are subjected to strict scrutiny. 2, content neutrality is a core principle. The government cannot discriminate between the message, favored or disfavored messages. Offensive speech is protected because in the eyes of the court, the benefits of speech outweigh its costs. And then finally, as I have mentioned, the emergency principle, okay, where there has to be a strict causal connection between the speech and some imminent harm that is demonstrable. Very, very high standard. Let me conclude by mentioning some current challenges. Notwithstanding the court's unwavering commitment to free speech and landmark rulings over the past 5 decades, and even the unity on the court today, the First Amendment has been sidestepped much in practice today. I would say it's under siege perhaps as never before. Instead of the ample breathing room that I mentioned, free expression on too many campuses, I'm talking widespread, is now confined to safe spaces and restricted in the name of an ever-expanding list of microaggressions and forbidden terms. Biased response teams encourage students to inform on one another for speech infractions. Speech codes struck down time and time again by federal courts 3 decades ago have reappeared under the guise of Title IX regulations investigated and enforced by a ballooning campus bureaucracy. College speakers, as we know, are disinvited, shouted down, threatened, and assaulted by rioters. Comedians, Jerry Seinfeld, for example, avoid campus for fear of offending student sensitivities. And it seems that the guardianship of students' emotional safety has taken precedence over the challenges of and difficulties of learning. In response to this paternalistic trend, a few courageous voices at the University of Chicago remind us that, quote, education should not be intended to make people comfortable. It is to make them think, okay? And this says nothing about the censorship in terms of misinformation or big tech, and other forms in the state. And so hopefully the discussion of these core First Amendment principles, viewpoint neutrality, the emergency principle, the preferred place of speech given the function it serves to democracy, will help us maintain the First Amendment is the matrix of our free society, and help us maintain its preferred place in our constitutional scheme. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Joe, for this very thoughtful and engaging survey of First Amendment issues and the centrality of the First Amendment to American civil rights and civil liberties. And we have about 15 minutes for questions, and we'll open up the floor for questions.
Yeah, if there's not a question, you mentioned civil rights, and one of the arguments for restricting speech today is that, and it's an important argument to consider, right, and to wrestle with, is that offensive speech, racist speech, prevents marginalized groups from exercising their rights fully in society. Okay, it stigmatizes them and reinforces this stigma. I've thought long and hard about this. The counter argument to this is that historically these marginalized groups, whether it's civil rights or women's rights or LGBT, have wielded really the First Amendment is crucial, right? Is the crucial sword to their liberation and to their freedom. That's important to know. What would the civil rights movement have been like without free speech, right? And of course, I should say Lee. You could even look at, we look at the abolitionist movement, and we revere many of Frederick Douglass and William Lloyd Garrison, but there were efforts to really restrict what they were saying back then. It was profoundly offensive to mainstream sensibilities, right? And as you mentioned, you did a great job contributing to that statesmanship volume. We speak of systemic racism today in the 21st century. Imagine, what prejudice was like in the 19th century. So, the abolitionists were a despised minority, a radical minority that sought to influence public opinion and did have some effect on it. But there were calls, very strong calls to censorship then. You should remember the gag rule. So censorship cuts both ways.
So our floor is open for questions, and I'll ask you one just to get us going. In 1979, I was a college freshman, and I tried to have an open mind. I subscribed to National Review. I subscribed to this other magazine, the far left, the Progressive, and it happened to be that the controversy, the first few issues of my subscription, was that they were going to publish the plans for an H-bomb, which had been been available for a long time.
I remember that, Lee.
And so I thought it was kind of cool. Of course, it didn't. I was no threat receiving this information. I was failing college chemistry, I think, or I was distracted by football or something. So I was not a threat. But of course, that became a federal court case, the U.S. versus the Progressive. They ended up publishing parts of it. And it's sort of, then I never thought of it until really 9/11. And then the issue comes back, like you talked about, issues from the past in terms of threats to free speech. So here we have this really serious issue about where the balance comes between national security on one hand, and the other hand, as you've sort of alluded to earlier, the public's right to know. How do we balance that in the age of terrorism? I think that's another one of those profound questions that has to be grappled with.
Yeah, I mean, Lee, I think of Abu Ghraib, right? And I think of the publication of those images, and there were some saying that these images shouldn't have been published because they harmed national security. Or of course, the landmark case of the Pentagon Papers, right? Nixon's claiming that he's attempting to negotiate with a peace settlement with the North Vietnamese, and that this is going to destroy our government's credibility and its bargaining power at the table, and further demoralize the war effort. So I would say that, there is no, I don't think there's no easy answer to that, but certainly the Constitution itself, distinguishes between peacetime and wartime, and I think it's the magnitude of the threat. But the other danger is so much censorship can take place because of, under the pretext of national security, like the Alien and Sedition Acts, right? There was the pretext of, it really was a partisan attack on the Jefferson's Republican Party. On the part of the Federalists, and the national security threat was overblown. So I think it's being mindful of both claims, right? I often tell students that, on the one hand, Benjamin Franklin said those who would give up fundamental liberty for the sake of temporary security deserve neither security nor liberty, right? That's a nice, little saying, aphorism. But on the other side of that is that the Constitution is not a suicide compact. And so you hope judges can just do that. They can balance both claims judiciously. But, the preferred place of speech, even though it's preferred, it's not absolute, and national security has to be given a high priority, right? You can't publish tank movements or troop movements as well. So I don't know if that's dissatisfied. It's not a satisfying answer, but I don't think there's a completely clear answer to that. It's wrestling with both those interests, in recognizing that national security is an important interest, although it can be abused and overstated.
Yeah.
Other questions for Dr. Fornieri?
The marketplace as idea has shifted more and more towards social media. It's a great question. How is, say it again? Hey, Vera, I got part of that, but I didn't get.
I think I can read it, Joe.
Yeah, could you read it, please?
This is from Caitlin to everybody. As the marketplace of ideas has shifted more and more towards social media, how is the understanding of the First Amendment applied to these privately owned companies that are providing platforms for discussion? Have there been any legal cases that establish the role of the First Amendment in regulating what social media companies can and cannot censor?
That's a great question, and this is the brave new world of social media on the horizon. Are these public entities, right? Are they private entities? What about, there's a lot of controversy about the New York Post being censored by Facebook, right? Regarding the Joe Biden's son's laptop. And of course, the debate and controversy over Twitter. There have been some cases, interestingly, the case of what I call the foul-mouth cheerleader, Mahanoy, it's called. Mahanoy was a school district in Pennsylvania. And here, the cheerleader was cut from her it was some sports team or cheerleading squad. It may have
It was
been
her competition squad, was it not? Where she was
cheerleading. Yeah,
she-
cheer,
yeah.
it was cheerleading, right? It was cheerleading, and of course she you know, used some foul language on Snapchat, and this foul language was you know, viewed and heard by one of the coaches. And so she was disciplined for this. She sued, but she won the case because the school authorities could not, if you will, their reach did not extend to this private entity. It was not on school grounds. So it's interesting because one, it involves protection for the speech of a minor, okay, and two, they regarded, they really protected as a private entity the what's it called? I forgot again. TikTok? No, yeah, TikTok. Is that it? TikTok? Yeah. So, but I think, you know, there's going to be more of that, and I don't know what's percolating right now in terms of, I don't know any particular landmark cases involving Facebook, right? And one of the reasons is because it's going to be difficult to sue Facebook given current First Amendment law that protects private entities, and they're considered a private entity. But you know, what does that mean? Could you have a kind of an unholy alliance between these so-called private entities that become, you know, are on the brink of monopolizing certain avenues of communication that may approve or disapprove government messages? That's concerning, and that's a brave new world that we have to face. It's a great question.
Hey, Joe, Tom Cayazzo, question.
Yes.
So I don't know if you're familiar with it. I heard about it. There's a school in the North Dallas, Texas area called Collin College. Are you familiar with what's going on there on campus? Since I think you prefaced the discussion talking about free speech on campus. In a nutshell, not one, not two, but 3 professors over the last year have been terminated, or their contracts not renewed, or something that they had made up because the faculty members had spoken candidly and openly about some of the school policies pertaining to closing down for COVID or not closing down, or because of the Confederate statues that were there in the community. And what has happened each time, even though 2 of the cases I think have been settled, even though they've gotten monetary minimum money, but they have just been let go. So it seems that the precedent now is that, okay, yeah, your speech was violated, but you're not getting your job back. And that president of that college there had just received a contract extension for such great respect for civil liberties. And I don't know if you're familiar with that, but I know it's on fire.
Is it a private institution?
No, it's a 2-year college, public college. Collin, Collin.
Okay, it may implicate the First Amendment then. And of course, you mentioned the organization, which I would encourage everyone to connect with, and that is FIRE.
Right.
FIRE, which is nice. I mean, publicity kind of exposing this censorship to daylight often does the trick. I'm also part of an alliance formed out of Princeton University of scholars who unite to protect First Amendment rights, the Alliance of Scholars. So it's sad, but it's necessary. There's always been threats to speech, right? Whether the threat comes from the left or the right. And one has to be consistent in walking the walk and avoiding the principle of, you know, free speech for me, but not for thee, because I dislike your viewpoint. But you know, that's appalling. But it's, you know, it's just an example of the kind of climate that we're living in, increasingly. And if we as citizens and if our students don't, acquire a First Amendment culture, no parchment paper is going to save them from increasing intrusion. And as I think it was Vera or someone else, raised, it's complicated enough when you have things like social media. But without any guiding principles, how is one going to, be able to be an advocate for free speech? So, thank you so much.
Ladies and gentlemen, unfortunately, we are out of time. But we want to thank Dr. Fornieri for his great presentation and his time with us. And it's not insignificant to point out that before I came to East Georgia a decade ago, that fire actually took East Georgia State College to task on a personnel related issue. And today, this afternoon, fire, I believe I read in the newspaper, is issuing its yearly assessment of free speech on college campuses, I believe today. So it might be a good follow-up, Joe, to your talk is to ponder that. But we thank you so much for your time with us and your eloquent speech and the thoughtful response to our questions, and basically just hanging out with us and discussing these vital issues on such a vital Constitution Day.
My pleasure. Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity. And I hope to see my friends in Georgia soon. All right.
We love to see you too. And
Get me out of Rochester in the winter, please. All right.
Thank you, ladies.
Thank you.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for participating in this event. And we'll continue to dialogue on this issue. This concludes our event. Thank you.
All right, everything
Good
went
job,
well.
Kat. Good job. Good question, Tom. He's gone. Good question, Kat.
Thank you. I'm waiting for the stream to finish up and catch up on the other side, and then I'll go ahead and close everything out. So if you want to go ahead and jump off, you're good to go.
Thank you, Kat. Excellent job. You did wonderfully. You pulled it off, and I think we're in good shape.
All righty. Thanks so much.
Thanks, pal.
Bye.